So what's the focus of the channel? Well, right now the focus is that I'm an aspiring cinematographer, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is transition from my current job to doing this full time. Now that means I've got to go from a very basic understanding of how cinematography works, how the gear, the camera and everything, to putting myself in a position where clients are paying me for my service. So how do I get there? And this is what that channel is about. It's about a beginner's journey getting from one job into another. So everything that I learn along the way, I'm trying to give back. So any mistakes that I make, the users can see that. Any wins or tears or frustrations, then it'll all be there. So this is generally not aimed at people that are at an advanced level. This is literally for people like myself who are fed up of perhaps doing the job that they're in right now, and they want to take that next step, but they don't have the confidence to do it because there's an awful lot to learn. So hopefully as I level up, I can help other people do the same. And the purpose of today's video, well, it's actually funny you should mention that, because the reason why we're doing this video today is that it's the second part of controlling exposure. So the first part talked about how you can use an ND filter to actually fix a blown out window, and using a key light to fetch up the exposure of the actual person you're shooting. What we're going to be talking about today is actually making that a visually pleasing image. So stick around and we'll get into it. Welcome back, guys. It's Byron Phillips from byronphillipsmedia.com, and like the intro has alluded, we're going to be expanding on the first video. So that intro was about creating a mock interview setup with Mr. Moustache. Now what we have gone for here is we've gone for a nice light and airy feel. Now the video that I created before that had no, there was no thought put into creating a visually pleasing image. It was more a case of how we can control the window light and control the exposure. And the key light was actually positioned over there. Now the problem with that is that it doesn't make sense, because the actual key light is the window, so we actually wanted to make sure that the key light is over here where we've positioned this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through now everything that we've done to set this up. So we're just going to see some BTS, and then what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the layout a little bit so that you can see some different styles, because presently this is a very one-to-one relationship with the contrast ratio. What we're going to try and achieve later with a bit of negative fill is see how we can fetch in a bit more contrast to change the image. Right, so we're literally following on from the last video. So this is all about controlling light and sorting out our exposure. So for this scene, we are doing an interview and I will be the interviewee. And what we need to do first is find our frame, and this is really important because the last thing we want to do is set all the lights up, set the camera up, and then someone come in and go, don't like that at all, and then that means adjusting everything. So the first thing that we need to do is find our frame. Now for this particular interview, this video, what we're going to do is, because we're simulating the last video, we are going to be doing it from more or less this angle. And what's going to happen is it'll probably be lower down actually, so we're not quite that low, but around there, because we're going to be in a like a seated position. Now what this means is that the way that things are going to be positioned is the person is going to be sat there. They are going to be interviewed by a person who is sat there. Now the camera is going to be here, and the camera is going to be filming into the fill side of the person. And what's going to be happening is that the actual person is going to be lit up by the window. That's going to be our part of our main key light. And in order to augment that, because It's an overcast day and it is subject to change. The last thing you're going to want to do is for the exposure to change the person. So we're actually going to use a key light here, and that's going to come in at the same side as the actual main key light, which should make it look a lot more natural. So the first thing we need to do now is get things positioned so that we can get everything framed and make a start. Right, so we have set up the frame. Now what we've done is we've taken into consideration the key light, where the interviewer is going to be positioned, and where the interviewee, and where the actual framing of the shot. And I've just done a brief video on this so you can see the final result. Now the light's not turned off, we've not done any exposure or anything, but this is just the basics of where we are at the moment. So now that we've got the framing complete, what we need to do is tackle the issue of the key light, and in this instance it's going to be the main window light. Now at the moment it's currently blown out, so we need to control that with an ND filter and fetch that exposure down. The issue we're going to have with that is that by applying an ND filter, if we have to fetch it down by 4 stops, that means that we're going to be underexposed by 4 stops. Now the way that you get around this is actually using the key light. Now the key light is positioned on the same side as the window light, so that provides the most natural look. In the previous video, we had this on the other side of the room, and it was actually, so you had the key light behind me and then you had another key light in front of me, and that didn't provide the most natural look. But for today, this is what we're going to go with. Now by using the key light, what we'll do is we'll raise the exposure that is being projected onto myself, and then that way then we fetch down the exposure of the window so that it's not blown out, and then we've raised my exposure with the light. Now it's important that we know how many stops of light that we fetch the window down and how many stops of light this actual key light can provide us. So right now this is a 100-watt light, and it's not like an Aputure 300D where we would have a lot more leeway. I think I can only get an extra 3 stops of light if I set the lens at 2.2. So I roughly know already how much light extra this is going to give me. So I know in theory that I can only fetch that window light down by 3 stops and raise this up by 3 stops, and then that will create a nice natural image. So we're just going to get the light meter. We're going to find out exactly how much light is coming through the window, how much light is falling on me, and then we'll tackle then what ratios we can use. Right, so using the light meter now, we're going to take a reading of the actual window, and then we're going to take a reading of the light that's actually falling on myself, so you can understand how much light is coming through there, and that's why it looks so blown out as opposed to the light that's actually falling on my face. So at ISO 200, we are getting a rating of f8. So the lens will be set at 2.2, so that is 1, 2, 3, that's 4 stops brighter than what the light is given. Now, because I know that usually gives me 3 stops or 3.5 stops of light extra, that puts us in quite a good position. So that means, in theory, the window light should only be half a stop overexposed, which is fine, because with the camera's latitude, if I've got this at base exposure, anything like a stop or 2 over is not going to be too bad. I generally like to work in between 2 to 3 stops, brightness above key exposure, and 2 to 3 stops below. That's what I find this camera is, the image holds better in gradient, and that's the whole point. It's no good you saying, oh, I've got 10 stops of dynamic range. If the image falls apart at 3 stops over your base exposure, then you don't have the same range that you think you do. So with the Micro Four Thirds, getting as close as you can, or getting exposure as correct as you can at the time of taking the shot is really, really important when it comes to actually grading. It helps you out loads. You can actually push it a little bit more because you don't have to come so far, if that makes sense. So the light that is now actually falling on me is 4.5. So light coming in from the window is an f8, and then the light here is actually 4.5. So the light that's actually hitting me is 4.5, and that is it's 2.5 stops brighter. So we've got a bit of leeway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ND filter on, and because that was on f8, we are going to put it down to 4 stops, so that'll control that light, and then we'll see what happens. Right, so now you can see the effect of adding the ND. So adding the ND allows us to control the window light, but like I said earlier, I'm underexposed by 4 stops, and this is where the key light will come into play. So I'll have to turn the key light on at full power, and then we will see exactly how much stops of light that I'm getting from the key light. Right, so now what we've done is we've set the camera up to the actual settings that we're going to be using. Before it was for like the BTS part of it, but now we're actually getting closer to refining the image. So what we've done, we've set the lens to 2.2, the ISO is now at 200. We've controlled the backlight with the actual ND, and we've set that to ND4, and now we've turned on the main key light, and this is set to 100%. Now we need to know exactly how much light is being produced by the key light, because I can already see that the image is a little bit, well, it is underexposed. So at this distance where the key light is, I can't fetch it any closer because it comes into frame. We are getting an f-stop of 4.5. So I know that over the 2.2 I am getting 2.5 stops. What this means is, because I've set the ND filter at 4 stops, that is a stop and a half underexposed. So in order to correct this and get us to a nice base level, we'll need to fetch that ND filter 2.5 stops so that it matches my key light. So then that will mean then the actual key light is properly exposed. The actual window then at the base of the exposure of 2.2, that should be a stop and a half above, which should be a hell of a lot better than the blown out mess that we saw earlier. So we'll just set that now. Right, so what we've done is we've matched the ND filter to the amount of light that's being given by the key light. So the ND filter has been set to 2.5 stops, which is fetching the exposure down by 2.5 stops, which is controlling that back window. As you can see, it's a lot more pleasant rather than the blown out mess. Now the key light itself is actually providing 2.5 extra stops. Now that's going to be constant exposure, which is great. So even if the light behind me fluctuates, it's not going to mess with the actual exposure of the person and myself during the interview. So that is key. So you can get away with a bit of exposure changing with the light because of the natural weather, the overcast day, or you might have a cloud go over and the exposure go up, but the actual key on the person remains constant. So that allows us to control some of the image. Now what we need to do is, this side is a lot more contrasty, there's a lot more dark that side. So what we're going to do is we're going to fetch in a board to actually fill that, and we will see exactly how much light that we can get in. So that we know now that we are at base exposure. And if I use the light meter, so if I'm facing that way, so that is actually giving us 1.8. So 2.2 we're actually just a stop under, but looking at the actual monitor, it does look a little dark. So if we want to push that up, we can fetch the actual fill light in now. Right, so what we've done now is we've actually fetched in some reflective board or some white cork board, and basically what that is doing now, that is reflecting the ambient light from the key light and the window light. So that has gone from a 1.8 to a 2.5. So that is actually providing us with a little bit more light than we actually want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that back a little bit. Right, so what I've done is I've moved this now further back, and what we're doing is now we're getting an exposure of 2.2. So we are now at base exposure for the light here, for the fill light, and for the key light, and we've got that under control as well. So the actual lighting is improved considerably from when we first started. Now what I am noticing is in the image is that behind me, that is pretty, it's dark. So what I'm trying to go for is a nice light, bright daylight feeling. So what we're going to do is we're going to shine a light up at the ceiling, which will provide enough bounce, and then that will shine down, lighting up that area, giving us a little bit more texture. So what we've done is we've added another light that way, now that is bouncing off the ceiling, which is creating a bit more ambience in that area. I didn't particularly like it at the moment. It was a little bit too dark for the theme that we were going for, and that is a nice bright and airy feeling to the actual interview. So what we've actually gone and done is we've controlled that window light. We've controlled the exposure of my skin with adding a key light. We have set up a V-flat to actually provide additional fill, so there's not a need for another light there. And then all we've done behind that V-fill is that we've added another light that is bouncing off the ceiling, and that is providing us with the extra ambience and texture back there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly pick the camera up and walk around to see exactly how this is set up. Right, so we're just going to quickly do a run through of the final setup. Now what we've got is we've got Mr. Moustache doing the interview with myself. Now that is where the camera will be positioned. We are using the V-flat. Now this is something I created after seeing some work done by photographers, and they were using this, and I thought this is fantastic. Now on one side you have white corkboard, which is providing us with fill, and then on the other, if you can see, it's actually black cardboard, and that allows us then to turn it around and provide negative fill, and it's been working out brilliant today. Now we've got our main key light, which is going through a big soft diffuser. So that is actually only going through one layer of diffusion, and I do have an egg crate on it, and the reason for that is I wanted to minimize any spill, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not that's cutting the actual stop of light down. And then over in the corner over there, we've actually got the light, which is just bouncing off the ceiling and providing us with a bit more ambience. Now what I'll do is I'll turn all the lights off just for you to see the effect that this stuff is having. Alright, so just to show, this is with everything turned off. As you can see, that area over there is quite dark and unpleasant and not being very lit up, and with no key light we're not actually getting any of the key filled in at all. So I'm only using 2 lights for this particular setup and 1 fill. Right, so just giving you a bit more of a demonstration of the V-flat. This is the front side or the white side. Now this is literally just 4 A1 cork boards, and these have all been literally with white masking tape sellotaped together. There's enough gap in between the actual seams to allow it to fold either way, and when it's in this configuration it's rigid enough to stand up, but it means I don't have to have any additional stands because it stands itself. And then the fantastic thing is, if I want to go for a more contrasty image, all I've got to do is literally turn it around, and what we have then is that side can be used as a negative fill. So what we'll do is that once we've shot the main mock part of the interview using the fill side, we will then turn this around and see the effects of what happens with the actual negative fill. And then you can't see it, but that's the actual light. Now in there is an 85 watt bulb, and all I've done is I've put the diffuser on top, and this is what it looks like from this angle. So it's literally just pointing up, and give us a nice bounce. And the reason why I've got the diffusion on is so that by the time it reflects off the ceiling, it's already diffused and it's not going to create too many harsh shadows on this plant, which you could see the shadow a tiny bit when I didn't put the actual diffusion on, so that would help control that. So that is basically how we've got this setup. Now the lighting that we've used for this is literally providing a 1-to-1 ratio. Well, it's almost 1-to-1, so it's very, very close. And what that means is that the key light and the fill light is providing a very even light. We've been able to control the actual window with the ND filter, so this provides a nice, pleasing image. So when you're actually conducting the interview, the user or the viewer is not going to be distracted by the fact that the window is completely blown out or there are parts of the image that just doesn't feel right. So if you're going for a nice clean image, then this is something that you would perhaps use. Now, if you are wanting something a bit more contrasty, what we can do is we can change that fill to be a negative fill. And because I built that V flat, that allows us to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change that now to provide some negative fill, and then we can see what the effects are of actually changing that. So like we can see, just by changing the board to a negative fill, we can see the impact that has on the current image. So we can see there's a lot more less light on the fill side. The key light itself hasn't changed, so that hasn't been impacted at all, but the impact has come from just by changing that one board. So it really does depend on what type of scene you're going through, but a simple change just by doing the fill can make a dramatic difference on the actual final image. So I hope that was beneficial and it's been useful to you guys. Really hope you like, and yeah, so please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.